Today I'm going to demonstrate how to use a whipped and woven lazy daisy stitch to create this kind of circular woven form. I have another video that shows how to use this stitch to create a side view of a flower like this purple and blue flower using whipped and woven lazy daisy, where that's just a portion of a circle. This one's going to focus on using two different weaving patterns and working all the way around in a circle. So you can see I've already done some of the long lazy daisy stitches here, and I'll demonstrate a couple for you. But here, they look very long and very tight compared to what you might be used to seeing a lazy daisy as this kind of soft, rounded petal. And that's deliberate because at the end, by weaving through them and opening them up, we're going to give them a more geometric shape, and we're going to cover a portion of them. So it's correct that for this kind of weaving, they start out very long and linear and tight. These are created the same way as any other lazy daisy stitch, where we're going to bring our needle up at the bottom and come back down through that same hole. And instead of pulling tight, we're going to leave a loop here, and we're going to bring our needle up just at that juncture between the top of the lazy daisy and what will be a French knot. Pull that tight. And so you can see that unlike a loose lazy daisy, we want this to be very tight and secure because it needs to be strong enough to weave through. And just like a lazy daisy, I'm going to come back down in that same hole at the top to secure it. And let's do one more. Coming up at the bottom, down through the same hole, leave a loop, come up at the top, through our loop, pull our loop taut, go back down through the same hole. Once we've got all of the lazy daisy stitches done, we can start weaving them. And I'm going to show two different weaving patterns. There are a lot of different ways to do this, and most of the ones that I do work where we proceed 2 stitches to the left and then loop back 1 stitch, 2 more to the left, loop back 1 stitch, so that it's both woven through and then wrapped around a stitch. And the difference is really about where you start and end those stitches. So for this first one, we're going to come up through the center of the lazy daisy stitch rather than in between 2. So we're not dividing our thread, we're just coming up between the 2 sides of that lazy daisy stitch. And then after this, we're just going to be weaving through on top rather than going back and forth on our fabric. I use sharp needles, so I weave through with the blunt end of my needle, but if you're using a blunt one, you can go through with the front. So we've come up through the middle of one. We're going to go under both halves of the next lazy daisy and skip it completely, and come up through the middle of the one next to it. So that is woven through. Now we want to go back and wrap. So we want to go back down through the middle of the one that we skipped. We're going to then skip the one next to it and come up through the middle of the next one. I tend to hold my hoop in my hand and just rotate it a little bit as I go to make it easier. So you can see that we're right now coming up through the middle of this one, and we skipped the one to the right of it. So we're going to go back to the right, come down through its middle, skip the next one, come up through the middle of the other one. So that is starting to create that wrapped pattern. So back one, skip one, come up through the middle of the next one. And we'll do this all the way around in a circle. So now you can see I've completed one row coming up through the middle of the lazy daisy. If we wanted to keep these aligned, like you see in the blue here, we would keep going and doing several rows with that same pattern where we're coming up through the middle. I'm going to switch now to show you the other way of coming up in between the stitches, which is how I got this difference, this offset between this first row of pink and second row of pink where the stitches stagger. So if you want to stagger them, you switch from one weaving pattern to the other. If you want to keep them smooth, like in the blue here or in the purple here, you stick with one pattern all the way. So the first pattern, we came up in the middle of a lazy daisy. So in this one, we're instead going to come up between each stitch. So when I ended this last stitch, I ended it by bringing myself up in between two stitches instead of in the middle. So we're going to do the same kind of pattern of going back one and forward two. So I'm going to go back or to the right on one and wrap around that lazy daisy. And then I'm going to go forward under two of the stitches. So that wrapped the first one. Now I'm going to go back one, pass it under two, going forward or left. Back one, forward two, and keep doing this all the way around. You can see how the difference between coming up through the middle or coming up in between stitches offsets those stitches in the same way that you can see in a finished piece here, where you have smooth stitches that are all one type of pattern, and then these offset pink stitches by changing where we come up through it. So you can continue for as many rows, as many colors, and any mixture of patterns that you want to create this kind of circular form of whipped and woven lazy daisy. Thanks for watching.